just want to kick it off with Becky with the bad grades. Stay mad, Abby. Becky with the bad grades. Yes. um, and the case in what's the name? Abby, whatever that child's name is. The affirmative action case that was before the Supreme Court. This is basically her second crack. I mean, people who are on death row don't even get to get their appeals always heard at the Supreme Court. And this mediocre child, has had her case heard not once, but twice. And she's been denied not once, but twice. Hopefully now she goes and sits down some damn where and stops whining about, them few little minorities that might have got in over her. This is a very interesting case. It's a very interesting case for the simple fact. I mean, it's rather stupid. Like, I don't know how many of you remember when Bowling Greta came down in 2002 when I was still an undergrad then. It really changed the way people perceived, affirmative action processes in education. And rightfully or wrongfully so, the cases came down, and in schools, they didn't necessarily have the same, like they used to have, like some schools just have like real specific point values for stuff, right? And now, things are taken in consideration, things are weighted. It's a little bit more fluid the way things are. And now a larger category of things count as diversity and contribution than just looking at just strictly at race or ethnicity as maybe it was in the past. What's also really interesting about this young white woman, right, who's upset because she didn't get into the school of her choice. There's just several different things. One, white women are actually the largest beneficiaries from affirmative action programs in American history. Affirmative action programs were created to help, and ameliorate certain injustices and level the playing field predominantly for racial minorities. I mean, that's pretty much the reason in creation. However, when you look at the statistics, when you look at the actual programs and stuff, white women have actually benefited more than other groups. So that's one thing that's really interesting about her in this case attacking affirmative action. Two, what's really interesting is when you look at the actual facts of this case, like the argument that took place, Scalia has not passed away, but he said some real inflammatory stuff, and everyone's like, oh my God, Scalia's been saying crazy, inflammatory, racist stuff for decades now, right? But anyway, like with this case, what was really interesting, the allegation that somehow she was perfect, and I can't remember exactly what her scores were, but I remember I had higher scores back in the 90s when I was going to college. But she was perfect. She had like a 3-something GPA. She had like an 11 or 12. I think she had like 1160 SAT score. It was above average, but it wasn't like she was like really balling out of control. It's not like this kid had like a 1500 and got denied, right? So anyway, the argument goes, this is what always goes, those colored people over there are not as good as me, and they got in. But see, here's the problem with Abby's argument. There were way more people of color who were denied, who actually had better scores than she did, better grades than she did. They got denied. And there were also white people who got in over her who had quote unquote lesser grades and test scores. But again, they look at a whole range of values and issues and stuff like that when deciding who to submit to school. They do a full file review. And so this was her second crack or whatever. And I just couldn't, because of the way that is, and because of just the facts of this case, I could not understand why this went all the way up to the Supreme Court. Not once, but twice. She wasn't in the top 10% of her class, which would have given her automatic admission. She was offered the opportunity to go to one of the other campuses in the UT system and then to transfer over after her first year. She had a certain GPA. They gave her options. It wasn't like she was completely shut out, as my kids would, for no random reason, right? No. But it's like this white mediocrity syndrome. And no diss to anyone out there, because it's not, I'm not trying to say that all white people like are a certain way or whatever, but there are certain people who have a certain mentality that think they're just entitled to stuff and they should just exist and just have it because they want it. And it's like, sweetheart, that is not life. So Becky with the bad grades, I'm so happy the Supreme Court shot you down today. And even though it's a rather narrow ruling, it does leave in place the system that exists at UT. I have a shout out to my girl, Yasmin Irizarry, professor in the African American Studies Department. She's at UT. They're trying to build a community and foster an environment that is preparing people for the real world, that preparing people for engaging and interacting with others. And so I'm actually kind of glad she didn't get into UT because, they have a really brand of excellence, and clearly your crybaby stuff don't don't stand up to that too much. So yeah, I know that wasn't really like the legal analysis everyone was expecting, but I can't even be like legit legal, technical, academic with this one. Becky with the bad grades. Really happy you and your racist lawyer got shot down. Yeah, stay mad, Abby. Becky with the bad grades. Beyonce had Becky with the good hair. We got Becky with the bad grades. So, but no, seriously, like when we talk about systemic inequality, we talk about systemic racism and in generations of disinvestment, underinvestment, and lack of opportunity. And then to get to the collegiate level and pretend like that does not matter in the process for people. Not saying that it is an excuse, not saying that it should, trump other accomplishments. But when you're looking at your classes in a makeup, if you got 50 people with okay grades and okay SAT scores and they all play the cello, what do you need one more of those for? Do you have the young person that has worked their way through high school, has okay grades, has okay test scores, also has all these other extracurricular activities, volunteers, things like that? That's somebody that's going to add a little bit more, regardless of whether they're Black, light, white, Latino, Asian, don't matter. That's somebody that's going to add a little bit more to the environment of your campus. You don't need 50 people like Becky with the bad grades at your school. 49 is good enough. Then you start letting in some more people who kind of round things out. And that's what it seems like the UT process and other schools that have that process. Like I went to the Ohio State University, I gotta say the, and I helped with admissions stuff when I was in minority engineering. And the scholarship, Office of Minority Affairs, I forget what they changed their name to, but the scholarship criteria changed after the 2002 case. And they looked at a wider diversity. The schools will take into consideration, sexual orientation, what I'm saying now. Like schools will take different things because it's acknowledging that there are parts of our experience that make up who we are and help us contribute to the environment around us. And that is actually something that's really valuable. We could talk about diversity and whether or not, conversations about diversity are overrated, but there's also something to really be said that when you're sitting in a classroom with people who have different opinions and experiences with you, you learn so much more about the world and how things work than if you're sitting in a classroom with 50 people who are just like you, who went to schools just like yours, who come from homes just like yours. You don't learn anything. All it reinforces is what you think the world is. It doesn't give you a good representation of what the world ought to be or really actually is in reality. So yeah. Girl, bye. Bye, Felicia. So comment from the chat. The SAT scores are racist. It gives higher scores to wealthier white males. Tons of work done on it. It was originally designed to keep commoners out of elite colleges. Yeah, that's true. There is a lot of study out there about SAT scores, although despite how racist there are still some of us who do exceptionally well on tests. But overall, there is a lot of information out there. Same thing with LSAT scores. Pretty much all standardized testing has a racial bias inherent in it. And there are some schools that are moving away from using SAT scores and other scores. But that's why being able to look at a full package of an applicant and not just the test scores is really so important, because it's one thing, like the comment says, it's one thing we can acknowledge that there's racial biases. We can acknowledge that there's systemic, disinvestment, systemic racism. I mean, because really actually the use of SAT, that would be another example of systemic racism in higher education. However, even with the difference of people being able to have access to prep courses, right? I mean, that's going to be an economic disparity. If your parents can afford to pay for private tutors and things like that for you to do really well and keep retaking the test, that's a big difference from the kid that may or may not even have the $35 for the Kaplan book from the bookstore, let alone if you even have a bookstore anywhere near your community. So like I said, I've done a lot of academic advisement with primarily minority engineering students was more so my focus when I was an undergrad. But so we saw, I saw kids who did really well, but I saw kids who also struggled. But at the end of the day, they all did well in school because of their hard work ethic and their ability to utilize resources available in the university setting. So, looking at people as a well-rounded profile, that's one thing that they talked about when I went to the West Virginia University for law school. That's one thing they talked about in our admissions process as well, is looking at doing the full file review of students. And I think that's a good way to go, because you really get a better, well-rounded, viewpoint. Now, the elite schools will do whatever they're going to do. It is what it is. But for all the rest of schools, I really think that this approach to looking at, adding to the student body is a good way to go. So kudos to SCOTUS on Becky with the bad grades.